Hey guys, tonight we are standing ankle-deep in pale summer grass, the kind that bends instead of crunches, because Iceland has decided, once again, not to be warm. You're here at Þingvellir, the great assembly plain, where the ground itself is slowly tearing apart, one continental plate politely drifting away from the other, like two people who've realized the conversation is over. Cold air slides into your lungs, sharp but clean, and somewhere nearby a horse snorts, as if judging your life choices. This is not a place designed for comfort, and yes, you probably won't survive this, not in the sense of danger, but in the sense of boredom, exposure, and the deep personal challenge of standing around for days while grown adults argue about sheep. So, before you get comfortable, take a moment to like the video and subscribe, but only if you genuinely enjoy what I do here. And while you're settling in, drop a comment with your location and local time. It's always comforting to know where in the world people are half asleep together. Now, dim the lights, maybe turn on a fan for that soft background hum, and let's ease into tonight's journey together. You walk slowly across the plain, because everyone else is walking slowly, and rushing here would feel deeply inappropriate. The Alþing, this summer assembly, has drawn people from all over Iceland, which, in the medieval period, is not a small effort. You didn't just pop in after work. You planned this for months, maybe all winter, waiting for the ice to loosen its grip on the roads, waiting for the days to stretch long enough that darkness barely counts anymore. This gathering happens once a year, and missing it means missing your chance at justice, gossip, alliances, and the mild social thrill of seeing people who are usually several fjords away. You are not here to fight, at least you hope you're not. Most people aren't. The mainstream historical fact, your grounding point for the evening, is that the Alþing, founded around the year 930, is often described as one of the world's oldest parliaments. There is no king presiding here, no palace, no throne. Instead, there is grass, rock, water, and a shared agreement that words matter more than swords. Historians still argue whether this system was born from necessity, idealism, or simply the lack of trees big enough to build a castle. As you approach, the landscape feels both empty and crowded. Tents, really more like turf booths, dot the plain, low and practical, blending into the earth like they're trying not to be noticed. Smoke drifts lazily from cooking fires, never in a hurry, because nothing here is in a hurry. The soundscape is soft, murmured conversations, wind brushing against wool cloaks, the occasional laugh that travels farther than expected in the open air. There's no central bell, no dramatic announcement. You just arrive, and so does everyone else. You notice the Law Rock in the distance, Lögberg, rising slightly above the plain. It's not impressive by modern monument standards. No marble, no statues, no heroic poses, just stone. But this is where the laws will be spoken aloud, because there are no written law books in common use yet. That responsibility belongs to the law speaker, the lögsögumaður, whose entire job is to remember the law and recite it over a 3-year cycle. You imagine trying to memorize an entire legal code today and immediately feel tired. A gentle joke floats through your mind. At least no one can ask him to just email it later. As you walk, you pass groups setting up their temporary homes. Families unpack bundles of food. Chieftains, Godar, arrive with followers who pretend they're not impressed. You catch fragments of conversation, disputes hinted at but not yet voiced, alliances discussed in half-sentences, old feuds politely ignored for now. This place is neutral ground, at least in theory. Violence is discouraged, not because people are kinder here, but because everyone agrees this is not the right venue. There's a time and place for everything, and this is the time and place for talking. A quirky tidbit drifts into your awareness as you settle near your own camp. There are rules about where you can relieve yourself. Even in the 10th century, no one wants assembly-wide consequences for poor bathroom planning. Certain areas are designated for, let's call them, biological necessities, and ignoring that etiquette would earn you social disapproval far sharper than any fine. Medieval Iceland may lack written laws, but it absolutely does not lack judgment. You sit down, adjusting your cloak against the persistent breeze. Summer in Iceland is generous with daylight, but stingy with warmth. The sun hangs low but refuses to set, circling the sky like it forgot something important. Sleep will be strange here. People nap when they can, eyes shielded, bodies adapting. The law speaker, you're told, must maintain his voice through all this, no small feat when the air dries your throat and the wind steals half your words. Historians still argue whether the law speaker used subtle mnemonic devices, rhythm, or sheer stubbornness to keep everything straight. Time behaves differently already. Without clocks, without schedules carved into stone, the days stretch. You eat when hungry, listen when something interesting happens, wait when nothing does. Waiting, you realize, is the primary activity of the Alþing. Waiting for your case to be heard, waiting for someone else to finish speaking, waiting for the weather to decide what it's doing. This is governance at the speed of patience. You wander a bit farther, careful not to intrude. You see faces weathered by sea spray and farm work, hands thick with calluses, eyes sharp with memory. These are people who carry stories instead of books. News travels mouth to mouth here, and the Alþing is as much a social network as a legal one. Someone knows who married whom. Someone knows whose cow wandered off last winter. Someone knows a verse mocking a rival chieftain. And yes, poetry absolutely counts as social currency. A modern aside sneaks in as you watch all this. Imagine resolving legal disputes today by standing outside for a week, listening carefully, and hoping everyone remembers the rules correctly. No emails, no PDFs, no according to subsection C, just a man on a rock and a crowd nodding along, occasionally disagreeing, but mostly trusting the process because there isn't an alternative. It's oddly calming, also deeply inconvenient. As evening approaches, though evening is a flexible concept here, the air cools further, fires glow brighter, people gather closer. There's a sense that something important is about to begin, even though technically it already has. The arrival itself is part of the ritual. Being present matters, being seen matters, even silence matters. You lie back for a moment, looking up at the pale sky, listening to voices blend into a low hum. This place, balanced between continents, between pagan past and Christian future, between chaos and order, feels suspended. Tomorrow the laws will be spoken, disputes will surface, decisions will ripple outward across the island. But for now, you are simply here, breathing cold air, wrapped in wool, learning how slowly history can move when it's in no rush at all. You wake without the drama of a sunrise, because the sun never really left. It just hovered politely above the horizon all night, like a guest unsure when it's appropriate to go home. Your eyes open slowly, adjusting to the pale light leaking through turf walls and wool blankets. Around you, the temporary town of the Alþing is coming into a quiet kind of motion. No bells, no shouted orders, just people emerging from shelters, stretching stiff limbs, and accepting, without complaint, that this is another day of standing, listening, and waiting. You step outside your booth and immediately feel the ground's chill through your shoes. The grass is damp, not aggressively wet, just enough to remind you that Iceland is always in charge here. Camps are arranged with a kind of unspoken logic. Chieftains and their followings cluster together. Families claim familiar patches year after year. Newcomers hover at the edges, observing before committing to a spot. No one hands you a map. You're expected to figure it out by watching, asking quietly, and not being rude. This is where the slow rules begin to reveal themselves. The mainstream historical fact for this stretch of your journey is that the Alþing wasn't just a legal assembly, it was also a carefully managed temporary settlement governed by custom as much as law. There were expectations about behavior, noise, cleanliness, and respect. Break those expectations and you wouldn't be dragged off in chains. Instead, you'd suffer something far worse in a small society: collective disapproval.
people would stop helping you, stop listening, stop trading. And in a place this remote, that kind of silence could follow you home. You notice how quiet everything is. Conversations happen in low tones. Even laughter feels contained, as if the plain itself prefers moderation. There's no sense of festival chaos, despite the sheer number of people gathered. That's partly because everyone understands the purpose of being here. This isn't a fair, it's a working meeting, a very long, very outdoorsy meeting. Think less music festival, more multi-day committee session with sheep nearby. You learn quickly that there are rules no one needs to announce. Don't interrupt a speaker unless invited. Don't crowd the law rock unless you have business there. Don't touch another person's goods without asking. And perhaps most importantly, don't escalate. Arguments are expected. Escalation is not. Historians still argue whether this restraint came from genuine communal values or from the simple math of survival. Starting a fight here could trigger feuds that outlast generations. As you walk between camps, you see how people make themselves comfortable in minimalist ways. Cloaks double as blankets. Saddles become stools. Food is stored carefully, shared selectively. You spot dried fish, flatbread, butter packed into containers that smell faintly of milk and smoke. Cooking fires are small and controlled. Fuel is precious. Everything here feels measured, intentional, slow. A quirky tidbit surfaces as you observe a small group carefully repositioning stones around their booth. These stones aren't decorative, they're boundary markers. Even in this open plain, space matters. Booths have defined limits, and encroaching, intentionally or not, can spark disputes serious enough to end up before the courts. Medieval Iceland, it turns out, is deeply committed to the concept of personal space, even without fences. You pause near a group engaged in quiet discussion. No raised voices, just intense eye contact and occasional gestures. These are likely people preparing cases, rehearsing arguments, recalling details, aligning stories. Without written notes, everything depends on memory and consensus. You realize that persuasion here isn't about dramatic speeches, it's about calm repetition, clarity, and credibility. The person who stays composed often wins, not because they're right, but because they're believable. A modern aside slips in as you watch this. Imagine preparing for court by sitting on grass, murmuring your case to friends, hoping you all remember the same version later. No folders, no evidence binders, just shared recollection and trust. It's either beautifully human or mildly terrifying, depending on your personality. Etiquette extends even to how you move through the space. You don't walk directly through the middle of someone's gathering. You skirt around, giving a nod if eye contact happens. Greetings are brief. Lingering too long can look suspicious. Everyone is aware they're being seen, assessed, quietly categorized. Reputation is currency here, and the Alþing is where balances are checked. You notice how quiet everything is. Conversations happen in low tones. Even laughter feels contained, as if the plain itself prefers moderation. There's no sense of festival chaos, despite the sheer number of people gathered. That's partly because everyone understands the purpose of being here. This isn't a fair, it's a working meeting, a very long, very outdoorsy meeting. Think less music festival, more multi-day committee session with sheep nearby. You learn quickly that there are rules no one needs to announce. Don't interrupt a speaker unless invited. Don't crowd the law rock unless you have business there. Don't touch another person's goods without asking. And perhaps most importantly, don't escalate. Arguments are expected. Escalation is not. Historians still argue whether this restraint came from genuine communal values or from the simple math of survival. Starting a fight here could trigger feuds that outlast generations. As you walk between camps, you see how people make themselves comfortable in minimalist ways. Cloaks double as blankets. Saddles become stools. Food is stored carefully, shared selectively. You spot dried fish, flatbread, butter packed into containers that smell faintly of milk and smoke. Cooking fires are small and controlled. Fuel is precious. Everything here feels measured, intentional, slow. A quirky tidbit surfaces as you observe a small group carefully repositioning stones around their booth. These stones aren't decorative, they're boundary markers. Even in this open plain, space matters. Booths have defined limits, and encroaching, intentionally or not, can spark disputes serious enough to end up before the courts. Medieval Iceland, it turns out, is deeply committed to the concept of personal space, even without fences. You pause near a group engaged in quiet discussion. No raised voices, just intense eye contact and occasional gestures. These are likely people preparing cases, rehearsing arguments, recalling details, aligning stories. Without written notes, everything depends on memory and consensus. You realize that persuasion here isn't about dramatic speeches, it's about calm repetition, clarity, and credibility. The person who stays composed often wins, not because they're right, but because they're believable. A modern aside slips in as you watch this. Imagine preparing for court by sitting on grass, murmuring your case to friends, hoping you all remember the same version later. No folders, no evidence binders, just shared recollection and trust. It's either beautifully human or mildly terrifying, depending on your personality. Etiquette extends even to how you move through the space. You don't walk directly through the middle of someone's gathering. You skirt around, giving a nod if eye contact happens. Greetings are brief. Lingering too long can look suspicious. Everyone is aware they're being seen, assessed, quietly categorized. Reputation is currency here, and the Alþing is where balances are checked. You notice how quiet everything is. Conversations happen in low tones. Even laughter feels contained, as if the plain itself prefers moderation. There's no sense of festival chaos, despite the sheer number of people gathered. That's partly because everyone understands the purpose of being here. This isn't a fair, it's a working meeting, a very long, very outdoorsy meeting. Think less music festival, more multi-day committee session with sheep nearby. You learn quickly that there are rules no one needs to announce. Don't interrupt a speaker unless invited. Don't crowd the law rock unless you have business there. Don't touch another person's goods without asking. And perhaps most importantly, don't escalate. Arguments are expected. Escalation is not. Historians still argue whether this restraint came from genuine communal values or from the simple math of survival. Starting a fight here could trigger feuds that outlast generations. As you walk between camps, you see how people make themselves comfortable in minimalist ways. Cloaks double as blankets. Saddles become stools. Food is stored carefully, shared selectively. You spot dried fish, flatbread, butter packed into containers that smell faintly of milk and smoke.
You drift toward the law rock without anyone telling you to. Movement happens organically here, like a tide that doesn't need a moon. People begin to gather in loose arcs, careful not to crowd, careful not to look overeager. You find a spot where you can hear without being seen too clearly, which feels like the safest possible option. The stone itself rises only slightly from the ground, but it commands attention through tradition rather than height. This is where the laws live, at least for as long as the voice can carry them. The law speaker steps forward, and there's no fanfare, no announcement, no dramatic pause. He's just there, wrapped in a practical cloak, face weathered in a way that suggests both age and responsibility. The mainstream historical fact anchoring this moment is that the law speaker, elected for a fixed term, was required to recite roughly 1/3 of the entire law code each year, completing the cycle over 3 summers. No notes, no prompts, just memory, breath, and a crowd that needs him to get it right. You lean in slightly as he begins. His voice isn't loud by modern standards. It doesn't need to be. People quiet themselves. Conversations taper off. Even the wind seems to cooperate, easing just enough to let words travel. Sentences roll out in a steady cadence, formal but not ornate. This isn't storytelling meant to entertain. It's functional, precise, and deeply repetitive. Clauses stack gently on top of one another, like stones placed carefully so the whole structure doesn't collapse. You realize quickly that listening is an active task here. You can't drift too far without losing the thread. Names, obligations, fines, procedures, all spoken once, maybe twice, and then gone unless someone remembers them. People nod along, some mouthing phrases under their breath, as if reinforcing the words in their own minds. This is communal memory in action. The law doesn't belong to the law speaker alone. It belongs to everyone who hears it and agrees to carry it home. A quirky tidbit floats into your awareness as the recitation continues. The law speaker was traditionally required to have a strong, clear voice and good eyesight, not because he needed to read anything, but because seeing the crowd mattered. Eye contact helped authority stick. If you can look someone in the face while declaring the rules they must live by, those rules feel harder to ignore. Medieval public speaking, it turns out, is part acoustics, part psychology. You shift your weight from one foot to the other, the ground uneven beneath you. Standing this long would be a problem in modern life, but here it's simply expected. You notice how people manage it, subtle stretches, quiet adjustments, leaning slightly on staffs. No one sits. Sitting would signal disengagement, and disengagement here is almost a form of disrespect. Historians still argue whether the law speaker's recitations were truly word-perfect or whether minor variations were tolerated. Some scholars believe flexibility was built into the system, allowing interpretation to evolve naturally. Others argue that precision was paramount and deviations could undermine legal consistency. Standing here, listening to the steady rhythm, you suspect the truth lives somewhere in between. Memory breathes. It shifts slightly with each telling, and somehow everyone accepts that. As the recitation continues, cases are referenced, not decided yet, just acknowledged. Names are spoken calmly, without accusation. This isn't the moment for drama. That comes later, when disputes are heard and settlements negotiated. Right now, the focus is on reaffirming the shared framework. The law, in this setting, feels less like a weapon and more like a weather pattern, something you adapt to, plan around, and respect, because resisting it is exhausting. A modern aside slips in as your legs start to ache. Imagine attending a legal briefing today where the speaker refuses to use slides, notes, or microphones, and everyone just nods and says, "Yes, that seems correct." You'd call it unprofessional. Here, it's the height of legitimacy. You glance around and notice faces reflecting different levels of engagement. Some people listen intently, brows furrowed. Others seem to absorb the sound more than the content, letting the words wash over them like a familiar song. For many, these laws aren't new. They're reaffirmations, comforting in their predictability. Knowing the rules, even strict ones, is soothing when life itself is unpredictable. The voice continues, unbroken. Occasionally, the law speaker pauses, not for effect, but for breath. No one fills the silence. Silence here is functional, not awkward. It gives the words room to settle. Birds call in the distance. Somewhere, a horse stamps its hoof. Life continues around the law, not interrupted by it. As the session winds down, there's no applause, no closing statement. The law speaker simply steps back.
People disperse slowly, conversations restarting in low murmurs. You realize that something significant has happened, even if it didn't feel dramatic. The law has been spoken into the air, anchored briefly in sound before returning to memory. And you, standing here with sore feet and a quiet mind, have participated simply by listening.
You don't walk away from the law rock so much as drift from it, like a thought that's finished but still echoing. The words you just heard linger in your head, not as specific clauses, but as a rhythm. Law here isn't a book you close, it's a tune you keep humming while you go about your day. As people disperse, small groups form almost immediately, replaying sections out loud, correcting each other gently, testing memory the way you might test a loose tooth with your tongue. This is where you begin to understand the real miracle of the Alþing. Not that laws exist, but that they survive without ink. The mainstream historical fact anchoring this stretch of your wandering is that medieval Iceland relied almost entirely on oral law well into the 12th century. Parchment was rare, literacy limited, and yet the legal system functioned, mostly, because memory was trained, shared, and socially enforced. Forgetting wasn't just a personal flaw, it was a civic failure. You sit on a low rock near a group of men quietly reciting a passage together. They're not arguing, they're syncing. One starts a sentence, another finishes it. A third corrects a word choice, not sharply, but with the careful tone you'd use adjusting someone's grip on a fragile object. You realize this is rehearsal, but not in the theatrical sense. It's maintenance, like tightening knots before a storm. A quirky tidbit slips into your awareness as someone mentions a mnemonic trick, associating laws with landmarks around the plain. A clause about property boundaries linked mentally to a distant ridge. A fine for negligence paired with the sound of a nearby stream. Historians still argue whether such memory palaces were widely used by lawspeakers and chieftains, or whether this is a later scholarly projection. Standing here, watching people gesture toward the landscape as they speak, it feels plausible enough. You try it yourself, just for fun. You attach a vague legal concept, say compensation for injury, to the smell of smoke drifting from a cooking fire. Immediately, it sticks better. Congratulations, you've accidentally joined medieval continuing legal education. No certificate will be issued. The absence of written records changes how people speak. There's a carefulness to language, a resistance to improvisation. Jokes are dry, often repetitive, because novelty risks confusion. When someone tells a humorous aside, it's usually brief and familiar, a shared reference everyone recognizes. One man mutters that at least the laws don't change as often as the weather, earning a soft ripple of amusement. That's joke one for the day. It lands gently and disappears. You notice that disputes, when discussed informally, are framed in terms of memory rather than evidence. Do you remember when carries more weight than I can prove that. Witnesses matter because they remember, not because they document. Reputation matters because it predicts how reliable someone's memory is likely to be. A person known for exaggeration finds their recollections quietly discounted. No formal objection required. A modern aside creeps in as you watch this process. Imagine a courtroom today where someone says, "I remember it differently," and everyone nods thoughtfully instead of demanding receipts. It feels both deeply trusting and mildly alarming. You decide it's probably best not to apply this system to parking tickets. As the afternoon stretches on, you see younger people, teenagers really, being gently included in these recitations. Someone asks them to repeat a line. Someone else fills in when they hesitate. This is training, informal but intentional. The law must outlive the people currently standing here, and that requires transmission. Historians still argue whether this early exposure was systematic or simply a byproduct of communal life. Either way, it's effective.
You don't need a school when the entire society is a classroom. You walk past a chieftain seated with his followers, going over a case he'll soon present. He speaks slowly, deliberately, repeating key points until everyone around him can recite them back. This isn't micromanagement, it's insurance. If his case comes down to whose version is remembered most clearly, he wants redundancy, multiple minds carrying the same narrative. It's almost poetic in a bureaucratic sort of way. The physical environment reinforces this memory culture. With no buildings towering overhead, no distractions flashing or chiming, your attention naturally narrows. The sound of voices carries cleanly across the plain. The landscape itself feels like a mnemonic device, open, uncluttered, predictable. You begin to understand why this system worked here, in this place, even if it might collapse elsewhere. Iceland's sparsity is doing half the work. You take a moment to rest, stretching your legs and leaning back against a stone. The light hasn't shifted much, but your body insists time is passing. Hunger arrives quietly, fatigue follows, and yet your mind feels oddly alert, tuned to listening rather than doing. That might be the strangest adjustment of all, learning that participation doesn't always require action. Another gentle joke drifts through a nearby group as someone remarks that forgetting the law is easier than forgetting your neighbor borrowed your axe. Laughter follows, low and brief. That's joke too. It works because it's true. Memory is selective, and everyone here knows it. As you listen, you realize that the oral nature of the law also makes it adaptable. Subtle shifts in emphasis, tone, or example can steer interpretation without changing the core. This flexibility might explain how the system survived for centuries, or it might be the reason it eventually needed writing down. Historians still argue whether the move to written law preserved Icelandic legal tradition or froze it prematurely. The wind picks up slightly, carrying voices in unpredictable directions. Someone pauses mid-sentence, waits, then continues when conditions improve. Even the environment participates in the pacing. Nothing is rushed, nothing is forced. You find yourself slowing to match it, breathing more evenly, thoughts stretching out instead of piling up. As evening, again a flexible concept, approaches, the informal recitations taper off. People seem satisfied, as if the laws have been properly aired and tucked back into memory. You stand, brush grass from your cloak, and feel a quiet respect for this fragile system held together by voices, trust, and a shared commitment to remembering. It's not efficient, it's not foolproof, but here, on this plain, under this never-quite-setting sun, it's enough.
You don't hear disputes before you see them. You feel them, like a subtle tightening in the air, a shift in posture among the people nearby. Conversations lower. Circles form. Not tight, confrontational circles, but open ones, leaving space for movement and retreat. This is where the Alþing's calm begins to show its texture. Disagreement lives here, but it's padded, wrapped in procedure and expectation, softened by the understanding that everyone still has to sleep within shouting distance tonight. You edge closer, careful not to stare. A case is being discussed, not yet formally judged, but weighed. The mainstream historical fact anchoring this moment is that medieval Icelandic law emphasized compensation over punishment. Most offenses were resolved through fines, settlements, or negotiated outcomes rather than physical penalties. Justice here is less about retribution and more about restoring balance, or at least preventing things from getting worse. You listen as one man speaks, measured and precise. He describes a boundary crossed, a loss incurred. Another responds, equally calm, offering a slightly different memory of events. There's no shouting match, no dramatic accusations. This isn't because emotions are absent, it's because emotions are dangerous. Everyone knows that letting anger take the lead can turn a manageable dispute into a feud that lasts generations. So voices stay low. Words are chosen carefully.
A quirky tidbit surfaces as someone mentions a fine measured not in coins, but in silver weighed by the ounce. Currency here isn't standardized in neat little discs. Value is literal. You can feel it in your hand. Historians still argue whether this system made people more conscious of the real cost of wrongdoing, or whether it simply complicated transactions for everyone involved. Watching the careful calculations, you suspect both are true. You notice how much time is given to negotiation. Offers are made, countered, adjusted. No one seems impatient. That might be because impatience is expensive. Accepting a reasonable settlement now is often better than risking a harsher outcome later. The system rewards moderation, not bravado. A man who demands too much risks looking unreasonable, which can sway opinion against him when it matters most. A modern aside slips in as you observe this slow bargaining. Imagine resolving a legal dispute today by calmly discussing it outdoors for hours, with your neighbors watching and silently judging your tone. There's no gavel, but the pressure is intense. Reputation is on the line, and reputations here travel faster than horses. You hear mention of outlawry, not as a threat, but as a distant possibility. Full outlawry, being declared outside the law, is rare and serious. It doesn't mean immediate violence, it means isolation. No one is allowed to help you, no one can shelter you. In a society built on mutual aid, that's devastating. Lesser outlawry, temporary and limited, serves as a warning rather than a sentence. Historians still argue how often outlawry was actually enforced versus used as a deterrent, but everyone here understands its weight. The atmosphere remains controlled. Even when someone clearly disagrees, they express it with a tilt of the head, a careful rephrasing. Silence is used strategically. Letting a statement hang can be more effective than challenging it directly. You realize that the slow pace isn't accidental, it's a tool. Speed creates mistakes. Slowness creates space for reconsideration. Nearby, another case wraps up quietly. A settlement is reached. Hands are clasped, not warmly, but firmly. Witnesses nod, mentally storing the outcome. This matters. If someone later claims the agreement never happened, these witnesses will remember otherwise. Memory, once again, is enforcement. A gentle joke drifts through the group as someone remarks that paying a fine hurts less than paying for a feud. Soft laughter follows. That's joke one for this section, and it lands because it's painfully practical. Feuds are expensive. Everyone knows it. You watch as people disperse, tension easing without ceremony. There's no sense of victory or defeat, just resolution. That might be the most remarkable part. The system doesn't need winners, it needs continuity. People have to go home afterward and keep living next to each other, borrowing tools, trading goods, marrying into families. Burning bridges here is a luxury few can afford. As the day wears on, you see smaller disputes handled almost casually. A misunderstanding over grazing rights, a disagreement about shared labor. These are settled quickly, often with a third party stepping in to suggest a compromise. Formal courts exist, but not every issue needs them. Social pressure and common sense do a lot of the work. You sit back on a patch of grass, letting the murmurs wash over you. The calm is deceptive. This system only works because everyone participates in maintaining it. Opting out isn't really an option. Historians still argue whether this legal culture reflected genuine communal values or simply the constraints of survival in a harsh environment. Sitting here, listening to voices soften rather than sharpen, you suspect survival had a lot to do with it. The light remains stubbornly bright, refusing to signal closure. People continue talking, negotiating, resolving. You feel tired, but not drained. There's something oddly reassuring about a justice system that moves this slowly, that values patience over spectacle. As you stretch your legs and prepare to wander toward the cooking fires, you carry with you a quiet appreciation for disputes handled not with force, but with time.
Time stretches here in a way that feels almost intentional, as if the land itself is teaching you how to wait. After the disputes ebb and flow, there's no sharp transition to the next phase of the day. People don't announce breaks, they simply drift, following the weather, their stomachs, or the subtle cue that nothing urgent is happening right now. You learn quickly that the Alþing runs less on schedules and more on endurance. Clouds roll in, thin and indecisive. A breeze follows, cool but not hostile. You pull your cloak tighter and watch as others do the same, movements synchronized without discussion. This shared reaction is almost comforting. The mainstream historical fact anchoring this part of your experience is that Alþing sessions could last for weeks, with proceedings unfolding slowly, interrupted by weather, fatigue, and the sheer limits of human attention. Efficiency was not the goal, completion was. You find yourself standing around more than you ever thought possible. Standing while listening, standing while thinking, standing while doing nothing at all. Sitting is still rare, reserved for meals or moments of rest away from proceedings. The act of standing becomes meditative. Your feet ache just enough to keep you present. Too much comfort would invite distraction. A quirky tidbit surfaces as you watch someone pace in small, deliberate circles. It's said that experienced attendees learned to walk slowly back and forth to keep blood moving without appearing restless. Historians still argue whether this was a conscious technique or simply a habit developed over years of attendance. Either way, you try it yourself. It helps, slightly. Waiting here is social. When nothing is happening formally, conversations bloom. People exchange news from distant valleys. Someone describes a winter storm that trapped them indoors for weeks. Another mentions a marriage arrangement still being negotiated. These stories aren't filler, they're context. They remind everyone why the law matters, because it shapes the lives they're talking about. A modern aside creeps in as you realize how little stimulation you're getting compared to everyday life. No constant updates, no alerts, no glowing screens, just weather, voices, and the occasional argument about livestock. And somehow, your mind adapts. Thoughts slow down. Silence stops feeling awkward. You begin to understand why patience was considered a civic virtue here. Without it, the entire system would collapse under its own weight. Rain arrives briefly, more of a suggestion than a commitment. Cloaks go up, hoods are adjusted. No one leaves. Rain is not a reason to stop, it's just another condition to endure. Proceedings pause naturally, conversations thinning until the drizzle passes. When it does, everything resumes exactly where it left off, as if no time has passed at all. You notice how often people simply watch the sky, watch each other, watch the law rock, even when no one is speaking. Observation is participation here. Being seen paying attention matters. It signals respect for the process, even when the process is currently doing very little. A gentle joke floats through a nearby group as someone remarks that the weather is more predictable than the arguments. Soft chuckles ripple, brief and restrained. That's joke one, and it lands easily. Humor here doesn't interrupt the mood, it cushions it. As hours blur together, you lose track of what day it is. It doesn't matter. The assembly will end when it ends. Until then, life compresses into this plane. You eat, talk, wait, repeat. Historians still argue whether this slow pace fostered deeper consensus or simply reflected the limits of pre-modern logistics. Standing here with nothing pressing you forward, consensus feels less like a goal and more like a side effect of shared exhaustion. You stretch again, feeling the stiffness settle into your muscles. The ache is dull, manageable. It reminds you that you're still here, still part of this temporary world. And as the clouds thin and the light brightens once more, you realize that waiting isn't empty time. It's the space where decisions soften, tempers cool, and the law finds room to breathe.
Hunger arrives gently, not as a demand, but as a suggestion, and you follow it the way everyone else does, toward the quiet clustering of cooking fires. There's no official mealtime at the Alþing. People eat when they can, when a discussion pauses, when the weather cooperates, when a pot is ready. Food here isn't a spectacle, it's maintenance. Necessary, practical, and surprisingly social. You approach a small group seated on low stools and stones, careful to hover just outside until someone nods. That nod is permission enough. The mainstream historical fact anchoring this part of your slow wander is that the Alþing doubled as a seasonal marketplace. Trade happened alongside legal proceedings, not in a separate space, because separating them would make no sense. People traveled far to get here. Of course they brought goods to exchange. Of course they took advantage of the gathering. A pot simmers quietly over a fire, sending up steam that smells faintly of meat and herbs. You're offered a bowl without ceremony. No one asks what you've brought in return, not yet. Reciprocity here is understood, not itemized. You'll contribute later, or someone you're connected to will. This isn't generosity for its own sake, it's investment. You eat slowly, because rushing would feel rude. The food is simple, broth thickened with grains, bits of preserved meat, maybe dried fish softened by heat. It's warm, and that's what matters. Around you, people trade quietly. A length of homespun wool for a tool repair, butter for dried fish, news for favors. The market hums without shouting, prices negotiated in murmurs rather than proclamations. A quirky tidbit drifts into your awareness as someone mentions trading poetry, not metaphorically, actual verses, composed to honor someone or commemorate an event. Skilled poets can settle minor debts or gain goodwill with a well-placed stanza. Historians still argue how common this practice was, but no one here seems surprised when a short verse earns a nod of approval. Words, once again, have value. You notice that trade isn't frantic. No one is trying to corner the market. Supplies are limited, yes, but desperation would look suspicious. A person too eager to sell might be hiding something. A person too eager to buy might be planning leverage. Calm transactions signal stability. Stability is reassuring. A modern aside slips in as you watch someone barter carefully over a small bundle of goods. Imagine a pop-up market today where everyone whispers, no one advertises, and social trust replaces receipts. It would either be incredibly peaceful or descend into chaos within minutes. Here, it somehow works. You move on, weaving between groups sharing meals. Children dart in and out, carrying messages, fetching water, learning by observation how all this functions. No one tells them they're learning, they just are. A girl listens intently as two adults discuss a trade agreement, her eyes tracking the exchange. This is education without a classroom, economics taught by proximity. As you eat, conversations drift back toward cases, but lightly. This isn't the time for arguments. Food smooths edges. Disagreements feel less sharp when your stomach isn't empty. You realize this might be intentional. Timing matters here. Bringing up a contentious point before someone's eaten would be impolite at best, strategic at worst. A gentle joke floats through the group as someone remarks that food settles disputes faster than law. Soft laughter follows. That's joke one for this section, and it earns a few nods. No one disagrees. You wander toward another cluster where goods are laid out more openly. Skins, tools, carved objects, nothing flashy, everything useful. You overhear someone negotiating for a horse, not physically present, but described in careful detail. Color, temperament, age. Trust fills in where sight can't. Historians still argue how often such long-distance trades succeeded without deception, but reputation, again, does the heavy lifting. Lie once, and your market collapses. The light remains steady, almost hypnotic. Time feels suspended between bites and exchanges. You sit for a while, listening to stories from other parts of the island. A flood last spring, a good fishing season, a bad one. These details matter. They inform decisions, alliances, future disputes. Information is currency too. You finish eating and feel the warmth settle into your body. The ache in your legs eases slightly. You help clear a bowl, earning a quiet word of thanks. No grand gestures, just continuity. The market continues around you, blending seamlessly with the legal and social life of the assembly. Nothing is compartmentalized here. Law, trade, food, gossip, they all happen in the same space at the same pace.
As you step away from the fires, you carry more than sustenance. You carry a sense of how interconnected everything is. The Alþing isn't just about rules, it's about maintaining a network strong enough to survive isolation, weather, and memory itself. And as the murmurs fade back into the background, you prepare to notice something subtler still, the quiet influence of those who rarely speak publicly, yet shape outcomes all the same.
You begin to notice the quiet currents beneath the surface, the conversations that happen slightly to the side, the decisions that form without ever being announced. Not everyone here stands on the law rock, not everyone speaks in formal settings, and yet influence moves through the Alþing like groundwater, unseen but shaping everything above it. You watch a woman move between groups, her pace unhurried, her presence acknowledged with nods and brief smiles. She doesn't interrupt. She listens, then leans in just enough to offer a comment. People pause when she speaks. The mainstream historical fact anchoring this moment is that while medieval Icelandic law formally excluded women from speaking at the Alþing, they could own property, manage estates, and exert significant influence through family ties and negotiation behind the scenes. Power here isn't always loud. A quirky tidbit surfaces as you overhear someone mention that widows, in particular, often wielded notable authority. Free from certain marital constraints, they could act more independently in legal and economic matters. Historians still argue how widespread this autonomy truly was, but the respect shown to certain women here suggests it wasn't merely theoretical. You also notice outsiders, traders from abroad, travelers from distant regions of the island, hovering at the edges. They listen more than they speak. Their clothing, accents, or mannerisms mark them as different, but not unwelcome. Iceland depends on connections beyond its shores, even if those connections arrive quietly. Outsiders bring news, goods, and perspective. Their value is recognized, even if their voices carry less formal weight. A modern aside slips in as you observe this subtle dance. Imagine a meeting where the most influential people never raise their hands or take the microphone, but everyone still waits to hear what they think. It's a reminder that authority doesn't always announce itself. You see how information flows through these informal channels. A woman mentions a detail from a case to a relative, who mentions it to a chieftain, who adjusts his position accordingly. No conspiracy, just communication. The system relies on it. Without these quiet exchanges, the formal proceedings would feel hollow, disconnected from lived reality. Children continue to move through these spaces, absorbing dynamics as much as words. They see who listens to whom, who defers, who avoids certain topics. This is social literacy being taught without instruction. Historians still argue whether such observational learning was more effective than formal training, but watching it happen, you can see how quickly patterns embed themselves. You catch a fragment of conversation in a language you don't fully understand, perhaps Old Norse tinged with something else, a trader explaining a foreign custom. The listeners nod politely, curious but reserved. New ideas are welcome here, but cautiously. Change happens slowly, filtered through existing norms. That's not resistance, it's self-preservation. A gentle joke drifts through a nearby group as someone remarks that the quietest voices often travel the farthest. Soft laughter follows. That's joke one for this section, and it lands with a knowing nod or two. You realize that silence itself is a tool. Choosing not to speak publicly can preserve flexibility. Once words are spoken aloud at the law rock, they're fixed in memory. Informal conversations allow for adjustment, testing, retreat. This is where consensus is softened before it's hardened into law. As the day wears on, you notice how disputes you saw earlier are subtly reshaped by these background conversations. A demand is reduced, a concession is prepared. By the time matters return to formal space, they're already halfway resolved. The public face of justice is calm because the private work has already been done. Historians still argue whether this informal influence undermined the fairness of the Alþing or enhanced it by preventing unnecessary conflict. Standing here, watching people navigate relationships with care, it feels less like corruption and more like lubrication. Without it, everything would grind to a halt. The light remains steady, the air cool. You feel yourself slowing further, attuned now to pauses as much as words. The assembly isn't just what's said aloud, it's what's implied, deferred, whispered, and withheld. And understanding that prepares you for the next shift, a deeper, quieter one, where old beliefs and new ones share the same space, sometimes uneasily, sometimes in peace.
As evening drifts in, though the light barely acknowledges it, you sense a subtle change in tone. Conversations soften. The day's edges round off. People speak a little more reflectively now, as if the long hours of standing and listening have worn down anything sharp. This is when belief enters the picture, not announced, not argued, but present all the same. You notice small gestures that weren't there before. Someone traces a quick sign over their chest before eating. Someone else murmurs a short phrase under their breath before speaking a difficult truth. Nearby, a man touches a small carved object hanging from his belt, old, worn smooth by fingers. The mainstream historical fact anchoring this moment is that during the later years of the Alþing's early history, Iceland stood at a crossroads between Norse pagan traditions and Christianity, officially adopting Christianity around the year 1000 through a decision made at this very assembly. What strikes you is how little spectacle that shift seems to involve here. No mass conversions, no dramatic confrontations. Instead, old and new beliefs overlap quietly. Pagan customs persist in habits, metaphors, and seasonal rhythms, while Christian practices slide in through prayer, law, and social expectation. Historians still argue whether this transition was as peaceful as later sources suggest, but standing here, the coexistence feels deliberate, almost careful. A quirky tidbit surfaces as you overhear someone mention that, for a time, Icelanders were allowed to privately practice pagan rituals even after Christianity became the official religion. Public conformity mattered more than private belief. It's a compromise that feels very much in character for this place, prioritizing social stability over ideological purity. You walk past a small group discussing the old gods, not reverently but familiarly. Stories of Thor and Odin surface as cultural touchstones rather than objects of worship. These myths still explain the landscape, the weather, the stubbornness of life here. Christianity adds structure, morality, and new narratives, but it doesn't erase what came before. It layers over it. A modern aside creeps in as you observe this blending. Imagine a major religious shift handled not by shouting matches or ultimatums, but by quiet agreement and gradual adjustment. It feels almost unreal by modern standards, and yet here it is, working, at least for now. You notice how belief intersects with law. Certain customs are reframed rather than abolished. Old practices are given new interpretations. This flexibility helps the system absorb change without cracking. Historians still argue whether the Alþing's role in religious transition was driven by genuine consensus or political necessity, but either way, the result is a rare thing: continuity through compromise. A gentle joke drifts through a nearby conversation as someone remarks that the gods, old or new, seem equally unimpressed by the weather. Soft laughter follows. That's joke one for this section, and it lands easily. The sky, after all, hasn't changed its habits in response to human belief. As evening, or something like it, settles, you feel the weight of the day, the long listening, the careful speaking, the standing, the waiting. Belief here isn't loud. It doesn't demand.
It accompanies. It offers comfort without insisting on attention. Fires glow brighter now, their light warm against the cool air. People gather closer, voices lower. Stories turn inward, family histories, shared memories, quiet hopes. Faith in this setting feels less like doctrine and more like reassurance that order exists somewhere, even if it's hard to see. You sit for a while, letting the murmurs blend with the wind. The Alþing has held law, trade, dispute, and belief in the same open space without separating them. That balance feels fragile but intentional. And as the light finally begins to soften, you sense that the end is approaching, not abruptly, but gently. Camps will break soon, words will carry home, and the silence will return to this plain, holding everything that was spoken like a secret it's content to keep.
You wake to a different kind of quiet. Not the anticipatory hush of beginnings, but the settled calm of endings. The plain feels looser now, as if the Alþing itself is exhaling. Camps stir earlier than usual. People move with purpose, folding wool, packing goods, dismantling turf walls that only days ago felt semi-permanent. Nothing here is meant to last, and everyone understands that. Permanence lives in memory, not structures. You step outside and take in the scene one last time. The Law Rock stands empty, just stone again. No voice rises from it today. The mainstream historical fact anchoring this final phase is that once the assembly concluded, its decisions traveled outward entirely by word of mouth. There were no official messengers dispatched to every valley. Each person carried the law back with them, responsible for remembering, interpreting, and applying what had been decided here. A quirky tidbit surfaces as you overhear someone quietly reciting key outcomes to themselves while packing, like a traveler double-checking directions before a long journey. Historians still argue how often details shifted as laws spread across the island, but repetition, spoken aloud, again and again, was the safeguard. Forgetting wasn't just a mistake, it was a risk. Goodbyes are brief. No grand farewells. People nod, clasp forearms, exchange promises to meet again next summer, if weather and life allow. There's an understanding that some faces won't return. Travel is hard. Winters are unforgiving. Absence is normal here. Sentimentality would be exhausting. You watch as groups head off in different directions, paths diverging almost immediately. The temporary town dissolves into movement. The grass begins to reappear beneath where booths stood. Smoke thins. The plain starts to look empty again, as if nothing happened. But you know better. Words were spoken here that will shape arguments, marriages, property lines, and grudges for months, maybe years. A modern aside drifts through your thoughts as you imagine a major legal conference today ending without press releases, recordings, or official summaries, just people walking away, hoping everyone remembers the same version. It feels impossible, and yet this system survived for centuries. You linger a moment longer, reluctant to leave. The silence feels earned. You think about the patience it took to make all this work, the standing, the listening, the waiting, the careful speaking. Historians still argue whether the Alþing functioned because Icelanders were uniquely cooperative or because isolation left them no choice. Standing here now, those explanations feel less opposed than complementary. You begin your own departure, footsteps slow, measured. The path away from Þingvellir feels different from the one that brought you in, lighter somehow. You carry less uncertainty. The law is no longer something happening ahead of you. It's behind you now, resting in memory, ready to be lived. As the distance grows, sounds fade. Voices disappear. Even the wind softens.
The plain resumes its ancient role as quiet land between forces, holding only echoes. Your pace snows further, breath evening out. Thoughts lengthen, stretch, lose their urgency. There's nothing left to resolve here. Everything that needed saying has been said. And now, as promised, you let yourself rest. The images soften. Grass becomes texture rather than place. Stone becomes shape rather than symbol. The murmurs you heard dissolve into a low, comforting hum, like distant surf or wind moving through a narrow pass. Your body feels heavier, supported by the ground beneath you, wherever you are listening from. You remind yourself that nothing is being asked of you anymore. No standing, no listening closely, no remembering. The laws can carry themselves now. You've done enough simply by being present. Breath slows, shoulders loosen. The light dims in your mind, even if it hasn't fully dimmed in the sky. You're safe here, in this quiet after history, where nothing needs to happen next. If a thought drifts in, you let it pass, like a traveler heading the other way. No need to follow it, no need to engage. The plain fades completely now, leaving only calm, steady darkness and the gentle certainty that everything important has already been handled. Rest easy.